All right, welcome into Carps Corner as we sit here with training camp edition now. Got some preseason news, college football playoff rankings are out with the coaches poll, why that matters. Some news with the Big Ten, seeing what could potentially come out about later today, later this week about their media rights deal, rumored to be pretty big, why that matters so much. And then some news from Ohio State's training camp, which I know all the Buckeye fans are excited to get out there and ultimately see what's going on. So I want to start off with, we'll start off exactly with what's going on in training camp. We've got a couple question marks in the offensive line question mark, which we'll get into a little bit later, Coach Fry, Justin Fry spoke earlier. And then most recently, Jim Knowles and the linebackers had spoke. And so we'll talk about the linebackers first, and we'll tackle the defense, because I think that's an area of huge concern for many fans out there in Buckeye Nation. What is the defense ultimately going to look like for this Ohio State football club? Are they going to look like they did last year? Because if that's the case, this is probably a college football playoff team. They're a little better for sure, as long as they stay healthy. But if they're significantly better, and they want to be what Ryan Day talked about, a top 10 defense, then I think this is potentially a national championship team. And they'll go as far as the defense takes them. Watching the receivers they run around, they've got loads of talent there. CJ Stroud looks as good as ever. Running backs look good. Offensive line still coming along. We'll get into the offense later this week. But the early observations are Ryan wanted to develop toughness. He wanted to develop toughness on both sides of the ball. Offensively, like I said, as we'll get into, but defensively, if you go back and look, the Oregon game, there were spots, numerous times last year where it didn't necessarily feel good. And then ultimately you saw it up in Ann Arbor. And then for the first half, mostly against Utah, where it was a defense that was getting run on quite a bit. It's a function of, defensive line not playing all that well, linebackers being slow to fit, maybe a little uncertain, inexperienced, and then a secondary that was beat up and lost some of their big hitters, and also inexperienced as well at times. And so they had to remedy some of these things. Ryan Day's trying to figure out how to solve it. And in today's day and age, it's really tough to go out there and grind your guys during training camp. You don't have two-a-days anymore. You can't really just go bang all the time. And so you have to find a way and put together an isolated week of, hey, we're going to go and be tough. We're going to work on the things that we're not great at. We're going to try to work on our deficiencies. So defense and running the ball is one of them. And in doing so, you're going to obviously help your offense, some of the short yardage issues they had last year. But, Jim Knowles came out and said that Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers have done a great job basically solidifying that linebacker room. And I know Tommy Eichenberg was the object of a lot of criticism last year. Didn't play great at the beginning of the season. But like I said, there were a lot going into play linebacker. There's a lot of things they have to be good. And Steele didn't play great. He'd make some flash plays. They had a number of departures last season. It was not ideal. But I felt like two guys that grew a lot as the season went on were Chambers and Eichenberg. And if you look at how well Tommy played at the end of last season and what he did and played really well in the Rose Bowl, really well. And to me, that speaks a lot. How much did you improve? Obviously, they weren't where they needed to be. And Steele, he's a guy that was playing running back last year, and they threw him over it right at the end during camp because they needed a body over there to try to solve some problems. And so, he's learning on the fly. And so both of those guys now have a full season under their belt. And that experience is invaluable. And just for an example, as you sit here, in life, you look at when you get a job. First day you show up, you're not necessarily focused on how well you're doing. You're trying to get your bearings on your surroundings, seeing what's going on, making sure you're not making a fool of yourself. And then you kind of isolate and silo up and try to make sure you can do the very best you can. But as you get more familiar with it, you get more comfortable. As you do better at it, you're going to expand your roles and responsibilities and opportunities. And that's no different in football. When you start out, you just try to learn your little job. And then try to learn maybe all of the linebackers' jobs. Then you're like, okay, see if I can learn the defensive line, see what all their stunts mean, see what goes on there. If I can help them out, if I know now I need to know where they're supposed to be. Then you know what? I'm going to learn the safeties behind me and when they're fitting. and where they're going to be involved in the run game. When they're involved in coverage, where are they going to be helping me? Where are they not? Because the essence of defense is ultimately knowing where your help is and being able to play into that and being able to support that and utilize the players around you, because no one player can do everything. Learn who's funneling things back to you, who you have to push stuff out to. And then ultimately you learn the corners on the outside, and they're the ones that probably are the most isolated from any other position group than the safeties, but they still get involved in the run game. And there's elements there where they're going to come down. You'll be in bunches where there's all the receivers, tight ends, running back clustered together, and you have to make calls back and forth. And when you don't really know what you're doing, or maybe you just know what you're doing, you make some calls, but you're not truly confident in it. You don't necessarily feel emboldened to be able to go out there and do it. Well, after a full season of knowing what to do, now you're able to play fast. You're playing better. Guys have more confidence in you. You're able to now talk to the safeties, talk to the defensive linemen. Hey, move, do this, move, do that. And when you have linebackers that are able to do that, that's great. Now, the problem, Tommy and Steele, they're great guys. They're both very quiet. And so pulling conversation out of them can be tough on the field. Getting them to be vocal leaders, which is what you need at the linebacker position, because you're the ones directing traffic. They're great kids, young men, but they learning about how to, hey, take the lead. You see it, let other people know. Don't keep it a secret. Help everybody out. And so they're starting to develop that confidence, and you can see it happening in practice, and just watching the speed of which they fit coming downhill, making plays in the backfield. And you can see the confidence that they have between them. And part of it is too, now the defensive line's a little more mature. Some of the guys who were freshmen, sophomores last year, kind of developing and growing. And you're expecting some big things, from Zach Harrison on the edge. You got a couple of young guys out there in Sawyer and JTT. Like, both of those guys are going to be really good, and they're showing signs. But all those guys playing together last year, those loads for your confidence and your ability to relate to each other. And you get excited when you make plays. And that's when defensive football becomes really fun. And so Jim Knowles said those guys kind of locked it down. But you can see when the light starts to come on for guys, how fast they move. And however fast they are, they're giving you that every play, because there's not the uncertainty. And guys that are really good players, they always say he plays faster than what his 40 indicates or how fast he really is. It's because their recognition is so great that they're able to get downhill. And that's what I've seen a lot of with Eichenberg, and it's coming along too with Steele. And Steele is very versatile. And you're going to see him move around, going to be up in the line, moving around for blitzing. He's really good in man-to-man coverage. There's a lot of different things that he can do. And so the dynamic combination of those guys with what they're able to do both out on the field together, really nice. So they're going to complement each other very, very well. And they play together really well. The problem is, like I said, both of them pretend like they're in church all day, and neither one of them will yell on a football field. So we're going to get that out of them. It's my goal for those guys, to get that out of them, to take the leadership role, make sure that everybody's understanding what's going on, and be able to lock that in. Also with that, you got a guy who came back, I believe, for his 6th season, maybe his 5th, Taraja Mitchell. And so he's going to be a good option for them when they go 3 down linebackers. And when you're playing the Michigans, Wisconsins, Iowas, Illinois, you're going to need to have a 3 linebacker set. Last year, they really didn't have that. The year before, they had 4 the year before, but last year they really didn't have that 3rd linebacker that they could heavily lean on. By the end of the season, they were heavily injured, and you had a lot of young guys. So trying to put people in kind of newer-ish positions when you don't really practice it and trying to just package it up for that week can be tough. And so Taraja Mitchell is going to fill that role. He's a veteran piece, and he's a thumper. He's a physical guy that can come downhill, and he knows his role, and he's really good at it. He's a great kid too. All these guys are great guys. I like them all. And then one of the other guys last year who was splitting time a lot with Eichenberg, he ended up having, some shoulder surgery in the offseason, sat out of the Rose Bowl, is Cody Simon, who is looking good as well. Playing fast, he can really move. He's still developing some of his confidence and some of his reads, but he's getting to the point where, I think they'll be able to have a nice rotation, rotating Cody with both Tommy, and if he can learn both of the positions, rotate him with Steele as well. And that's when you got something going on, is when all your linebackers can kind of play all 3 positions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all physically suited to be able to do it. But in a pinch, you trust the guy out there because you know where he's going to line up. You trust his ability, and you know he's going to be able to get people to the ground, which is ultimately what you have to do in defensive football. And then I'll throw out this little gem for you. Young guy, linebacker, freshman, 5-star dude, CJ Hicks, looks really good. He's got some ways to go as far as understanding the totality of the scheme, developing his body physically. But you could see it in the spring, and then you watch it now in camp as you go through that second install of everything. So what you do is you install probably 85, 80%, 75% of your stuff in the spring. And then you go through and start a training camp, you put it all in again. And so that second time through for some of these guys, you can really see that light click on, and you can see them lock in and understand exactly what is going on. And I think you're beginning to see a little bit now with CJ, with what he's able to do, because he's a really athletic dude. And when you start to see that athleticism, it means things are clicking, things are working, they're moving in the right direction. And so that's a big time ball right there, that's being able to happen. So that's a little bit of an update on the defensive side, the linebackers. We'll start getting into the safeties and what they're providing in the corners, because I love what Tim Walton and Perry Eliano are doing back there. And getting Josh Proctor back is the middle piece. Like, that could be very huge because he's physical, he can roam the middle, and he's a veteran player. Hasn't played a ton due to injury, and especially last year, but he can be a difference maker for that defense. So incorporating him and watching him be a guy like a little cobra and strike down there, coming in the box, and then also being able to cover the middle of the field and be an Ed Reed type player where you can really go from about numbers to numbers. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And Josh, I think, can give you that. Proctor's super athletic and very, very talented kid. So excited to see him out there as well, looking healthy, building on a really strong spring. So that's a little bit of the camp update, and we'll keep sprinkling these in because this is a big week for camp over at Ohio State. I want to talk now. Front Office Sports was reporting that the Big Ten media deal could be anywhere between 1.5 or 1.25 and $1.5 billion. So we'll throw this up here. It says, with the addition of USC and UCLA, the Big Ten now hopes to earn 50% more in media rights fees, at least $1.5 billion annually, sources told Front Office Sports. If the conference can pull this off, it could become the richest in all of college sports, with a media deal that dwarfs even the mighty SEC. Big Ten told FOS that it is grateful for the quality and quantity of potential media partners at this time, but at this time it would be inappropriate to speculate during an ongoing negotiation. So it was also reported that for the first time in 40 years, the Big Ten might not be on ABC or ESPN. For a long time, they controlled the rights, and then with the advent of the Big Ten network, Big Ten started leaning on Fox. Fox, launched FS1, BTN. Like, now they're in the game, and the Big Ten is more closely aligned themselves with the Fox entities. Big Ten super aligned with ESPN. That's who runs their network, as is the ACC. Now, the ESPN or the SEC used to be with CBS. That expired. It'll be done in 2 years. The ESPN family gobbled that up, so they'll own the SEC in totality. So that leaves CBS out there. And then it's also rumored that NBC wants to do prime time games. And so that's big. They do the primetime Sunday night. They want to call it their double header, Saturday night, Sunday night. And so let me throw this up. My guy Jay Book threw it up here. Big noon for a big time Fox game. The 3:30 window for CBS, which is what they've traditionally had for the SEC, that would now be going to the Big Ten. And then an NBC primetime game. It gives you a lot of variability and a lot of options across a plethora of platforms and networks. I think it's a really good option. The only drawback is ESPN still controls a lot of the narratives in college football, given the fact that they have the highest rated daily programming and they have the selection show. And so they have Big Ten people involved in that, but they're going to naturally push their own products. And people get upset about that But when you're paying hundreds of millions of dollars to these different groups every year, you want to make sure that you're pushing and promoting the things that you own and the things that people can ultimately watch. And so I understand why they do it. I get why they're doing it. And it makes a ton of sense for that to ultimately be the case. It's kind of crappy, but that's just the way it is. But conversely, the Big Ten would have exposure then on 3 broadcast networks. CBS also has the CBS Sports Network. NBC, they've got some stuff, and they've also got Peacock. Fox has FS1 and FS2, so they've got some other options in there. But you'd be on 3 big broadcast networks with the ability to also go to the big BTN and the other Fox affiliates. Like, that is huge. It gives a broad platform across the country for which the Big Ten would be able to operate. And if you start talking about $1.6 billion, just to make the math easy, if you have 16 teams, it's $100 million a team. Depending on who else you pull in there. And the fact that this hasn't gotten done yet, like, there still might be negotiations with teams to be added later, how that would ultimately be structured. There's a lot of stuff that would be working in this that could potentially enrich this deal should a Notre Dame join, especially if the Big Ten now is more working with NBC. They might be kind of apt to push them in there, and they could take one of those windows on a fairly consistent basis. Or maybe you pull in an Oregon, a Washington, a Stanford, whoever it might be. But I guarantee you that there are conversations that have been happening and are going to continue to happen until this is announced about what this deal could look like in the event that teams X, Y, Z, whoever it might be, are ultimately added, and what that would look like financially for the conference as a whole and for each university in and of itself. Because $100 million is a large sum of money that solves a lot of problems for a lot of athletic institutions. And so I know that there's a lot of people leaning in on this. There's a lot of people that are very interested on this. I worked with Rick Neuheisel earlier this week on XM. Rick, he's with CBS. He goes, I'd like to know. He goes, it's amazing how they're keeping this under wraps, but they haven't really released anything to anyone. And especially when you start talking about college football playoff expansion, they've done a great job of holding those cards until everybody's ready to go. But that also has the media component that they're still all working out right now. All right, the last piece that I want to get into is the recent released coaches top 25. And so USA Today put that out, came out early this week. Some people don't think it's a big deal. The college football playoff rankings, they come out, week 6 of the season, whatever it is, week 7 of the season, somewhere in there. The AP poll, the coaches poll don't matter anymore. Well, here's the reality of it. They still matter. And they matter a lot because when we watch games, Fox, ESPN, NBC, CBS, they sell us the game and the power of it based on the branding, but then also beside the number beside it. And so as we sit here and we look at, okay, well, you've got Cincinnati, Arkansas. That should be a pretty good game week 1. Why? Well, 2 teams that are ranked in the top 25. Cincinnati went to the college football playoff last year. They're sitting there and they're ranked 21st. You look at Notre Dame and Ohio State. Should be a great game. Why? Well, it's 2 versus 5. So as we sit here and look at it, you got your usual suspects in the top 5. You've got Bama, Ohio State, you've got Georgia, you have Clemson, and Notre Dame sitting there at 5. Then you have Michigan sitting there at 6. I'm going to be honest. I looked through Michigan's schedule. I thought that was a little bit overrated for them. But after looking at it and not playing a very difficult non-conference schedule and their crossover games being Iowa, Illinois. Oh, goodness. Can't remember the third. But they avoid Wisconsin. So they have Michigan State at home. They have Penn State home and Ohio State on the road. So there's a realistic chance they could be a 1-loss or maybe 0-loss team going into Ohio State this year. So that's 6 fits. Fits probably pretty well. Got Michigan State, the next Big Ten team, at 14. They're going out to play Washington. They've got a fairly decent little non-conference slate there. And then with that, they've got their traditional conference games. But for the Big Ten, when people tell me Ohio State, it doesn't matter, It matters where they're ranked, because Cincinnati made it to the CFP last year because they started the season ranked 8th. It matters where your opponents are ranked, because that's how people are judging you, because football is a relative game. So the fact that Michigan's ranked in 6th, Michigan State is ranked 14th, that obviously helps. Wisconsin is ranked 20th. But that's where it ends. There is no Penn State. There is no Iowa. Now they're lurking. They're close. They're not terribly far away. But so many people will continue to tell me, and I'll hammer on this all day long, it doesn't matter where you're ranked. It does. And it matters where your opponents are ranked, because getting into the CFP is nice, but you want to be able to get in there with the best seeds. You want to be able to pick the bowl game that you're playing in location-wise. And those things matter because it's a relative game. It's not like swimming. It's not track and field where you can go out and just post times, and it doesn't matter who you're going against. This matters because how you play against them, what the game looks like, what the score says, is going to tell a lot based upon the perceived quality of your opponent. Now, perception isn't always reality, and that doesn't matter. But the Big Ten having 4 teams ranked in the top 25. Okay, you got 2 in the top 10, 2 in the top 6. That's great. Michigan State, 3 in the top 15. Wisconsin, 4 in the top 20. But the fact that you don't have an Iowa in there, the fact that you don't have a Penn State in there, that kind of stings a little bit. Maybe you could slide a Nebraska in there at some point. Maybe a Minnesota climbs in. But you need these teams in there, because when they beat each other up in conference, it's important to make sure that they're not falling too far. And when people watch this, these are going to be the anchor points as you sit here and look at it in this college football playoff selection committee. These will be anchor points for them as well, regardless of what they say. And so they don't necessarily look at the preseason rankings today, but they'll have an idea what the rankings are a month from now. And they'll have an idea what the rankings are 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And before they make their selection, this is a template that they're going to use. And we're going to be moving people and shuffling people around because of it. Brands matter, names matter. Florida's not in the top 25. Florida plays Utah to start the season. If Florida beats Utah, Utah's at 8. I guarantee you Florida would jump to 12. Now, if Central Florida, who's ranked like 32nd, would beat Utah at 8, they would probably jump to 17. Brands matter, perceptions matter, but where you start ultimately matters. So this is good for Ohio State. Ohio State plays Michigan this year. They play Michigan State. They have Wisconsin in a crossover game. They play Notre Dame to open the season. And so they're going to have a chance to get a lot of boosts through here. So hopefully the rest of the Big Ten comes along. But Ohio State starting off at 2, and the perception that it's them and Bama and Georgia, that's big. And who's the 4th best team? Well, they're telling us today it's Clemson. Clemson's got to get their quarterback situation figured out, and we'll see if they're ultimately able to do that. But right now, as we sit here and look at this, we're going to continue to dive in and dig in and look at the strength of conferences, because I think there's some importance there with the Big Ten and the SEC, and you got that Big 12 sitting there, and what are they going to look like if you strip out Oklahoma and Texas? Well, 2 teams that are sitting more at the back end of the top 25, but Cincinnati at 21, Houston at 25. So they would still have 4 teams in there. And Oklahoma is just 1 spot above Baylor. So it's not like it's a crazy drop off. We'll get in. I'll get into my conference predictions. We'll go over all that stuff coming up. I'll continue to give you updates from Ohio State spring ball, or training camp rather. Take a look at all that and where we're headed. Look at some of the other position groups and how I think this is going to fit in, and what could potentially happen. So we'll get into all that. Try to pull some guests in to help bolster this a little bit, so it's not just me monologuing. But I appreciate you tuning into this edition of Carps Corner. Subscribe, listen, like, share, comment, all the things that you need to do. Thank you for helping me with this. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you soon.